Awesome. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another great conversation with some of our industry experts. Today, we're going to be talking with the Intuit team about customer-driven experimentation and how they've built a culture of experimentation around customer empathy. So I would like to first welcome our panel. First up is Dylan Lewis, longtime TLC member since back before we did this on video. I think you may have been one of the original members actually many years ago. So thank you for returning, Dylan. Dylan's currently the principal product manager for Intuit's internal experimentation platform, the Intuit Experimentation Platform, ingeniously named IXP. Bree Amaryllis is my dear friend and partner in crime at Intuit. She's a marketing manager of global marketing and communication learning and development team. She and I have the pleasure of teaching a lot of workshops together around the world, which you'll hear a little bit more about. And then the wonderful Lee Wong. Hi, Lee. She is a staff technical program manager at experimentation and data analytics. And so she's the person that is in charge of making sure the rubber hits the road right now. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a very large number of tests you were launching last week, right?
Yeah, we're trying to get about 20 to 30 tests running out this week by today.
Yeah. So we all need to be very, very grateful that Lee found time to join this conversation, and because we all know how hard that is to even launch one test when you've got a bunch of eyeballs on it, and you've got 20 to 30. So thank you for being here. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to ask Bree to kick us off. Bree, I have this other, your presentation open here.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for calling in and spending time to hear a little bit about what we have been doing at Intuit. And I'm really excited to share it with you because I, as you will hear, started in this role about a year ago knowing very little about experimentation and what it actually looks like to try to teach about experimentation and to scale and the kinds of complexities that happen in a really complex organization like Intuit has. And so I've learned so much, and anything that I can share that would be helpful to anybody else, I'm just so happy to be able to have an opportunity to do that. So thank you. If you want to go to the next slide, Kelly, we are going to talk a little bit about the journey that I went on with the extreme involvement of Kelly and Lee and Dylan and a bunch of other really, really smart people to develop this training that we launched for marketing communications folks at Intuit, and how I had this light bulb moment of the importance of this training in connection to Intuit's core innovation capabilities. And because that is broadly available, I get the opportunity to kind of talk you guys through a little bit about our design principles here that we use that would be familiar to anybody who's read Lean Startup and is familiar with IDEO and a lot of that rapid prototyping that happens with Silicon Valley tech startups. It's not anything super groundbreaking, but it's something that we believe very deeply in at Intuit. And so I'm excited to talk you through that a little bit. And then how it connects to the learning rainbow, which is the thing that we talk about in our training and is really the thing that feels like the nugget that has come out of this that feels really special. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we get to have Lee and Dylan here who have all this experience of implementing this process and working with so many teams, and they will be able to answer questions. And I'm of course hearing Kelly as well, but that's kind of the plan that we have today.
Awesome. And a couple of reminders for the team, for everybody on the TLC. If you got questions, use the TLC Slack, the calls channel, or the Zoom chat, or take yourself off mute. As I hear background noise, I'm trying to go in and find where it's coming from and muting your line. So if you try to unmute yourself and find you can't speak, it's because I muted you. So sorry about that, but just send me a little message to say you've got a question and I'll get you unmuted. All right, Bree, I'm gonna switch to the next slide.
Awesome. So we'll start with our journey. And so as I mentioned, I've been working in the marketing function for many years. I had been at Intuit for 3 years doing email marketing. And so I had exposure to experimentation. I knew of it enough to know that I wasn't doing it properly. But that's kind of the limitation of my experimentation experience at that point. And then about a year ago, I got this opportunity to come over to the learning and development team, and we had this insight that it was, we surveyed all of marketing communications, and it bubbled up that the most important skill that needed to be taught at Intuit for marketers was around experimentation and A/B testing. And so that's what I set out to do in the beginning. And we can go to the next slide. And we were tasked with bringing in to up-level data and experimentation skills. And I was lucky enough to get connected immediately with Dylan and immediately with Lee. And there, through Dylan, got connected with Kelly and immediately brought Kelly in to help with this process. But we went out to build this thing, and the way that we build things at Intuit is using Design for Delight, which is what we will talk about a little bit more today. But it's a whole process, and that's how we built this. And so it's kind of, you'll kind of get a little preview of what the D4D process is, because it starts with deep empathy. And so I did not know what this workshop looked like going into it. I went in really curious and trying to get a broad breadth of feedback and customer interviews from, and when I say customer, I mean internal customers. I'm talking about marketers, to understand where they were experiencing pain around experimentation, where they were getting those dead ends and those roadblocks that was causing all these feelings of frustration. And I also talked to their analyst partners to understand, like, from their perspective, where the gaps were, where there was opportunities. And we heard things like people were having a hard time with hypotheses. They were having there was a lot of different ways of approaching experimentation, as we all know, and there wasn't a consistent way that we were doing it here at Intuit. And so we set out immediately to create a content based on test design. So the original title of our class was the best practice, and it was all about test design. And while it's still very, very important, and we still teach test design, we talk about statistics, we talk about test types and KPIs and all of the important things and the technical pieces that are required to build rigorous tests. We had the light bulb moment, though, that it wasn't just the controlled experimentation that mattered, but it was the entire spectrum of experimentation. And rapid experimentation as an intro and as an into more controlled experiments was really powerful. And so as soon as I started talking about rapid experimentation, that immediately goes, oh, we're talking about D4D, we're talking about Design for Delight and customer-driven innovation. And it kind of blew the workshop up a little bit. And now we spend over 25% of the workshop doing D4D practice and walking through this framework. We can go to the next slide. So this is how we now talk about the spectrum of experimentation. And so understanding that people were having, marketers, one of the things we heard from marketers is that they would go to their analysts with this idea for a test, and their analyst would be, nope, not worth a test, like, go back, come again another day. And they would have this conversation every time, and they were just feeling so defeated, and they didn't understand how to get from this idea, this concept, they talked to a couple of customers to a point where it was worth an A/B test. It was worth asking for these resources, and it could, you could get analysts to agree to spend time on their project. So we now know that you should never go from, 2 customers to a fully built out A/B test. And we make this point really clearly in the workshop, that there's this middle ground. And by figuring out the most important, riskiest pieces of your cool idea and your solution that's going to really impact your customer, that by figuring out the thing that is the riskiest and testing that as inexpensively, as quickly as possible, that you can launch yourself into rigorous testing with confidence, and you can get more things greenlit. You can, you have a story to tell, and people will start to support those tests more often. Yeah. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about Intuit's core innovation capabilities. So when we talk about our core innovation capabilities at Intuit, we talk about customer-driven innovation as the how we're choosing our problems. And they came from Intuit's founder. His name is Scott Cook, this amazing man who studied characteristics of successful products inside and outside of Intuit, trying to figure out what was the thing that made it successes and the failures and busts. And he found that there were significant differences. And in all of the successes, all 3 of these criteria were there, and in the failures, 1 or 2 were not there. So it's finding that really important unsolved customer problem. So it's not about revenue. It's not our problem. It's not going to be an Intuit problem that we're solving. It's not business problems. It's genuinely understanding customers. Then we look for the things that we're uniquely able to solve, and then that we're able to build durable competitive advantage. So that's how we pick the problems we're solving. And then we get to talk about the how, and that's the design for delight. And so the how we innovate into it starts with that deep customer empathy. We can go to the next slide, actually. So the goal of D4D is to help teams go bold by going beyond just the customer expectation. And we're trying to evoke positive emotion throughout the customer experience, because we believe by doing so that we will be delivering dramatic improvements for our customers that, drive word of mouth and is what we call our secret sauce here at Intuit, but it's not really a secret because we talk about it all the time. It's like the worst.
It's on YouTube now.
but we still talk about it. Yeah. So when we talk about D4D, we start with that deep customer empathy. We talk about going broad to go narrow, and that's about getting a bunch of ideas and then narrowing down on the solution that we are going to go and follow through on and test out, and then rapid experimentation with customers. And so it was the connection of rapid experimentation with customers to that A/B testing and more rigorous testing that was that bridge that was this big light bulb moment. And so what's cool about D4D, in my opinion, I should also say that we have this really cool thing in Intuit, and I will share it after. There's a link to a Harvard Business Review article, but we have a group of people at Intuit called Innovation Catalysts, and they are people who we dedicate, and I am one of them, and we spend 10% of our working time dedicated to coaching other teams outside of our own on these practices and facilitating teams through this framework. So it's something that I am very passionate about, and was very excited to find a connection that I could then get to talk about D4D on a regular basis. But we like going broad to go narrow is exciting to me because there's many different types of tactics to do all of these things. So it's really just a framework, and there's many different ways, and you get to adjust it based off of what project you're working on, the team you're working with. So it's just really fun and creative. And then with the principle 3 is when we go into rapid experiments with customers, and we'll talk a little bit about that one as well. So you develop an idea to test, and you use these things to test as fast and inexpensively as possible. And after you run the test with you do your rapid experiment, you're making a decision and doing an action, right? So you're either iterating or you're pivoting. You're iterating and you're going up that spectrum of experimentation, or you're scrapping, you're going back to the drawing board, what have you. So it has that you open yourself up to be surprised by what the people tell you and what the actual feedback from customers is. So going into deep customer empathy, we talk about this in a couple of ways here at Intuit. The most common way is something we call Follow Me Homes, where we actually go to small businesses, because one of the major products of Intuit, of course, is QuickBooks. So we spend a lot of time just sitting with small business owners to just observe and see what they're doing. It's amazing the things that you observe that are, you can get into, you just have amazing stories of things that you would never imagine people do as part of their workflow. You're like, why are we doing it this way? And it's something you never would have gotten on a phone or in a survey. So that actual live interaction is so important. And then we also use those deep customer interviews where we're asking those probing questions like, why do you feel this way? And tell me the stories about when you tried to launch a test and it got shut down, or you got to the end of the test and you couldn't make a decision, you couldn't do an action, what happened? And let's unpack that a little bit. And it's amazing how much insights you can get from those things. So
I want to tie something together here, because you just hinted at it, but one of the things that Bree is describing here is how how Intuit uses deep customer empathy to understand their customers. But she's also telling you that she used this same process to understand her internal customers' needs and have empathy with them, the people who are trying to run experiments across Intuit. And that's how she came up with where we needed to focus for building that training.
Yeah. And then we came up with a bunch of different, coming from that empathy, I came up with a bunch of different things I could teach, a bunch of different things that people were interested in, and then narrowing down on what was actually going to deliver, what was the, what I could actually deliver on. Because there's, you know, some things like, you know, people headcount that I, as an L&D person, I have no impact on those things.
And you can't impact the technology, and you can't,
exactly.
So what can I help?
What can I actually help? And then going there and picking those things to test out. And we did early pilots where I found like an online hypothesis training, for example, and I learned, and I thought it was going to be amazing. I thought people were going to love it. And I launched it to 10 people, and it got, people learned, but it had a negative 60 NPS. So people hated that 30 minutes, and it was hugely beneficial for me to know, because then I was like, okay, this is going to be live. So I was able to pivot very early from an idea that this is going to be a blended experience, and this is going to have to be live because people do not want to read anything during the workday to be trained. They don't like it. So yeah, so we go broad and go narrow. These are our D4D, the Post-it notes is like our most useful tool to just brainstorm and go crazy, and it's fun to brainstorm. Then we go from going broad.
I just have to say that Intuit is single-handedly keeping Post-it notes in business.
It's true. And like I carry a box around with like Post-it notes and Sharpies. Like it's always important. So then we go to rapid experiments, and the rapid experiments help us make better decisions based on actual user behavior. And so we talk about rapid prototyping a lot, and I love planning sessions when I'm doing D4D, not with anybody, with teams, where we, you know, start the morning knowing that we're going to be talking and working through this framework, and knowing that at 2 o'clock a group of customers is going to come in, because it forces them to like create that prototype and put that idea in front of people, because they have no option. And sometimes, I don't know if you guys find this, but people are nervous about failure and looking foolish. And rapid experimentation is about like, how quickly can I find out where this is like going to fall on its face?
I want to find the holes quick. Yeah.
There's no ego in it. You don't get attached to the solution. You just go, okay, like here's an idea, and you go back and iterate and take out a pencil and rework your prototype for the next session. And this just allows our decisions to be based on facts and not on conjecture, because we battle the hippos here, the highest paid opinion in the room, where you know, they have these really strong opinions, and there's no actual insights that are backing it up. And so we can kind of go, okay, like let's test it. Like, how can we test this so we can actually stop talking about it and giving opinions and actually get that real data back. And it's the thing that you do before you build. It's the thing that you do before you don't want to waste people's time. You don't want to like have an engineer spend a week building something to find out that they built the wrong thing, right? So fundamentally, you need to know those things. Going to the next slide. This is, again, that spectrum of going from that less rigorous to the more rigorous. And we talk a lot about the confidence that you need to do a rapid experiment versus that A/B experiment. And we, you know, get to track it back to the conversation about statistical confidence and all of the things that we learned in the workshop too, because it is both things, but it's so much more powerful for us to connect it to that fast rapid experimentation and that empathy. And then finally, before we go
on, I want you to make sure that everyone knows that while you were delivering this training and you were developing it, that you were doing a number of experiments in each training in order to be able to learn along the way.
Thank you. We did test. Every single workshop was a test. And even Kelly and I did a workshop this week, and we had a test there. We tested for, like, the classic example and story that I have is we, on the first 2 or 3 workshops that we delivered, and we would go and do the statistics hour-long module, we would get the feedback that, like, my brain is tired, like it's too much in the afternoon for my brain to do math. And so we're like, all right, we're going to start the day off with statistics, because that's
Big
what
mistake.
Mark says. My hypothesis is going to be, I'm going to move it to the beginning. People are going to high five me. They're going to say, thank you so much. Like, my brain was so fresh. I feel so great after. And we went and delivered it first. People walked out of the training. 2 people got up and they didn't make it through the whole thing because they were so freaked out by this intense module leading off the day that we scared them away. And so now it goes second. So we start off with hypothesis. It's fun. Everyone feels very happy. And then once they have like a false sense of ease, then we hit them with statistics, and everybody likes that way better. And then this last week we were testing like how this works with remote people. How do these exercises that we do work with just one person? Because that's, something that you need to have happen if you're going to have remote people working or dialing in, is all of our activities needed to be able to be done by one person and not by a group. So we test all the time. But yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, go ahead, Kelly. Do you have anything you want to add?
Juan has a question for you, which I think is pretty valid at this stage. The approach you're talking about is really refreshing, but how do you balance getting enough customer insight with your priorities with the company, like your revenue goals, test velocity goals, and all that sort of thing?
So I have an answer for that. So my first year at Intuit, we did 40 experiments, and of those, two won, and they were actually pretty small wins. And then we pulled in the segment marketers who are really good at doing this customer empathy and design for delight and understanding the customer at a much better level than just say the web team, for example. And we had some huge wins. And so if your goal is to have a velocity of a whole bunch of experiments that are built by the digital optimization team, that's great. You can do that. But if you don't have the wins, and you really need to leverage like what the customer is trying to solve, not what you're trying to solve for the customer, you're never going to hit your revenue goals. And so you're going to have better results and better wins by understanding exactly what the customer needs to solve on your website or on your digital property, than just by trying to throw up a whole bunch of things that you believe are the best things. And so I don't think that you can have great test velocity, but having those wins that actually bring in more customers or make it so fewer customers or more customers are able to answer questions themselves, without having that deep customer empathy, that's actually where that comes from. That's where your wins come from. And so that's super important.
Yeah. And we also try to it's obviously you're never going to get fully away from the idea of losing and winning, but the idea that there's no actual loser if you set the test up in a way that you are learning every time. And often it's the failures and those big pivots in the beginning that lead you like into the space that actually like creates that big win and that big learning. So yeah, we're trying.
I feel like that feeds into your learning rainbow. So maybe kind of talk through how learning rainbow is used instead of thinking of wins versus losses.
Yeah. So we talk about we talk about how every single test, from a rapid experiment through the most rigorous and complex orthogonal test that you run, would have, really great hypotheses based off of it. And the way that we make the guesses and the way when we say we're going to do this thing because of this insight, we want those insights to come from a place of empathy and come from making sure that we're clear on that customer benefit that we're trying to deliver. And then from that question that we're trying to understand, creating a set of tests and a learning plan where we are going to say, we're going to start with this prototype. And if we get 80% of people who really love it, then we're going to feel really good about the next step, which is going to be a dry test. And we're going to have people come through and see if, on a larger scale, if we're going to get that action and that customers are going to really get excited about this benefit that we're trying to deliver and actually do the action we're hoping to see. And then taking that into more advanced tests. And in a lot of cases, this is also how we're going into product launches, right? Like you scale it and you start with identifying the riskiest pieces and building it out and scaling to a point of where you're doing, the back end tests where you're just, slowly launching things. But yeah, the stringing multiple tests together, developing a prioritized list of where you have gaps in your understanding and planning for those tests that would help to answer that. And it also helps, because then we talk about prioritization, and we talk about the challenges people have with prioritization, and things that we can do to show, here's the prioritized list of things we should be testing, and then here's the list of things that we can test because of resourcing, and like, let's have that conversation. That's a much more exciting conversation, and people with people trying to really drive amazing work with experimentation, and it happens through this learning plan and the rainbow. Yeah.
Yes. So the next slide is the Q&A slide. So I'll switch over to that in a second, but I wanted to ask you a couple of things for clarification for those that aren't as familiar with the terms and the process. So for example, can you describe for the TLC here, what do you mean by a rapid experiment, and how quick is something that is rapid? Like, are we talking 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah. So we say that it's something that you can test and get a result within 24 to 48 hours. And so for, some people who are probably on the call, like, you can do that with A/B testing, you have that kind of traffic, but we don't have that here in Intuit. And so that kind of takes A/B testing off of the list of the tools you could use to do rapid experimentation. And then but there is not just like the paper prototyping, although that's one of our favorites because it's so scrappy. There's a lot of different tools and methods of doing rapid experimentation. So we do it that way.
And what you're really trying to get there is there a level of interest in what it is that you're putting out there for the customers? And so many of the products that we have available today came from this methodology of starting small, seeing if there was interest. Okay, great, there's interest. What are my key leaps of faith in order to be able to make this so this is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger? Okay, well, I have to be able to have a supply side that this is this much. Great, so let me see how I can actually experiment on the supply side. Can I get more supply there? And so this is, rapid experiments I've seen when we first started doing this on the websites. We would see maybe a 400% lift on a very, very small percent of traffic. And then when we actually went and did the A/B test, we would see maybe a 2% lift because it got muted down because it wasn't as exciting or in your face, but it was part of the how the whole system worked. So it's really important that, Bree said 2 days, that's ideal. Sometimes you can do these experiments in 2 weeks. And sometimes many of you probably remember doing experiments with keywords just to see if there's interest in this particular term and particular thing there. We don't do that, but we have done that. Well,
we still do that, Dylan.
It depends on the team. So
depends on the team, but I mean, and we actually, that's how we learn about new offers a lot of times, where it is a rapid experimentation where we do run it through a couple thousand people for like a couple of days, and then TurboTax is lucky enough, depending on the timing, you do get enough traffic.
Sure.
So we'll put something out and test it out through a few days and like turn it off. But it gives us enough time to collect enough data to understand where we would iterate. And in a week or two, we'll launch another iteration of that rapid experimentation, because it helps us understand what messaging and offer makes sense. So we spent the time to build that out.
Absolutely. And the thing, when I started working with you guys, the thing that jumped out to me is this idea that if you have this solution in your head, this hypothesis, this idea on how to solve, let's even assume, let's give the benefit of the doubt that we started with a customer problem, although I think we all know that doesn't always happen. But let's say we started with a customer problem and we think we've got the right solution, but it's kind of big and hairy and it's going to be difficult to get the evidence to support something that's brand new and be very costly to develop it out. And a lot of the people that I've personally worked with or for in the last 10 years, they'll either scrap it or they'll have like this big tiger team that spends months developing all of this stuff, and then we push it out to test it and it loses. And so the way you guys start by saying, okay, if we have this solution, what are the assumptions that would need to be true for this solution to work? And then you take those lists of assumptions, and Dylan, you used the word leap of faith. Would one of you guys be willing to kind of share with us what you mean by leap of faith and how that feeds the rapid experimentation?
I can give my Airbnb example.
Yes. Oh,
okay?
I love the Airbnb example, please.
So the way that we talk about leap of faith assumptions is we talk about Airbnb and how it launched from a time when there was a design conference in San Francisco. A bunch of people were coming in, and there was a discussion board, and the question was being asked, where can I get accommodations that are inexpensive? Everything was sold out, like there's no options, and they're just trying to stay, you know, close to where this conference is. And so these two guys have the idea of like, what if we, you know, blow up an air mattress and stick it on the ground in our living room and feed them breakfast in the morning? Would that be like, maybe that would be a thing? And so if you think about that first attempt and the idea that, okay, like we're going to open up our room and have someone come, there's a lot of assumptions that would need to be true for that idea to work. The idea that someone's going to find accommodations by a picture, but without being seen, is an assumption, but that's an assumption that we know has been proven because hotels do that, motels do it. So it's, you know, you think about if there's other external versions of this where like, maybe it hasn't been shown to be true here and I haven't actually experienced it, but I can see that it's not like that risky and it's kind of been proven out this way. But you can see pretty quickly that the point of the story is the risky part is that the idea that someone is going to go and randomly stay on the floor on an air mattress. And so they set up a fake like front page that made it appear that there was a couple of options, and they were just looking to see if there was interest. And as soon as they got like 3 or 4 people, that was enough for them to go like, there's interest. That's not a barrier.
People would do this. People would share a mattress.
The next thing. Exactly. And I think about like, if you think about Lyft and Uber, like if you remember when it launched, how bananas it felt to us that, you know, a car is going to pull up on the side of the road. I'm going to get in the back seat, and it's not like, that was a scary thing. And so that like, there's ways to test into whether or not that is true without launching a 50 car squad of Lyft drivers to go and test it out, right? And so it's how can we test the riskiest piece of the piece of the solution? So the key thing is not the whole solution. How can we test the riskiest piece of it, so that we know if we need to like pivot or not, and because you want to know as quickly as possible.
Right. And so one of the things that the D4D framework allows you to do is first, you know, once you've gone big, what do you call it? Wide to narrow?
Go broad to go narrow.
Go broad to go narrow. And you've got that one solution. Now you've got to also go broad to go narrow to come up with all the different assumptions.
Oh yeah.
And then we narrow it down by identifying the ones that are the most risky with the least evidence.
Yeah, and we talk about it as uncomfortably narrow. Like it should be feeling like you're like missing opportunities behind you because you're going to get laser focused on just the one thing. So it's we talk about, it's not an easy thing, and it's something that like doing this process like is definitely a muscle that takes building, because there's points that feel a little uncomfortable.
The good thing about this though is that you may already be doing this and not know about it. And so if you look back at your experiments that you've run over the last 3 months, you may find ones that have deep customer empathy built into them that you don't realize. And so if you do, and those one, that's a great example that you can share and say, hey, look, this is working for us, or this isn't working for us. And so looking at those and figuring out what's worked in the past and doing that audit is super, super impactful and super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan and Lee, can you guys describe for us, and Dylan, if you'll start by describing like where you came from, and Lee, if you'll describe where you are today, organizationally speaking at Intuit, you guys have a kind of interesting model for experimentation. Could you, Dylan, describe like what it was, 10 years ago and how it's changed?
Yeah, so actually it was 14 years ago.
14?
Yeah, so I started Intuit November 28, 2005, and I was hired to do analytics and help with the experimentation team. And there were 10 people on the web team, I think, and I was the analyst on the team. And our goal was to experiment. And the previous year, they built their own experimentation platform, and they had 7 experiments they launched. 5 were inconclusive and actually broken, and 2 actually drove down results significantly. And so they purchased, yeah,
So
that's awesome.
winning.
Yeah, well, they learned. So they went out and they purchased a license with an experimentation tool, and then started thinking, oh, we need an analyst, and we need a team focused around this to build experiments. And we started at the beginning of that tax season with 1 experiment a week, and we ended up at the end of that with running about 7 a week. And as I said before, we didn't have lots of wins. The second year, we actually decided to employ a team of experiment teams and have 3 different teams that were not located together, and so that we could iterate and actually move much faster. And so at that point, we had a team in Mountain View, a team in the Midwest, and then a team in San Diego. And we got really, really good at operations. So we also were able to identify, this piece about getting deep customer empathy and getting those big wins, which was awesome. And then I was there for, I think, 12 years in total, helping to grow the experimentation program. And I think Lee joined about 5 years ago, and I'll hand it over to Lee to talk about where we're at today.
Yeah, so I think when I joined, we were starting to put in some process, and I actually came from the web team, on the other side being the ones running experimentation and working with like our marketing folks to come up with the ideas and taking things into research, going broad and going narrow. So it's actually an interesting shift for me to shift over to lead the experimentation program in analytics. So we actually have, like, over the past 4 to 5 years, fine-tuned our process, because we realized as teams were running more experiments, we wanted to make sure, one, we had visibility across everybody's team, right? What they're running, if their experiments impact other teams running experiments, because we didn't want to do it in a silo. So this process that we have now, where everybody enters, all their experiments in one system, is actually really helpful, because I'll be honest, I direct everybody to there and say, if you have an experiment running in a similar space, go there and check, because it could, your idea may be similar to somebody else's, or it could be so drastically different that it could impact their learning as well. And this year, we actually have a lot of new analysts on the team that we're working them through the process as well. We're explaining to them, as you are thinking, working with your business partners on your experiments, make sure you're also looping in your our own analytics team, right, to understand what it is. And we actually recently, this year, a couple weeks ago, launched like an analytics design test review, so that we're building a community to share. One analyst is working with one team to understand a new offer, and then another team's doing a different offer. Like, what are the impacts? What are we both trying to learn? So that's actually something I'm excited to see happen.
And is that what you guys are describing? Is that all within TurboTax?
It is, for me, is all within TurboTax. We actually have been increasing our experiments, at least since I've been in analytics. I want to say every year we've been increasing the number of experiments that we've been running, which is good. But we also have a little more rigor on terms of like what we are doing, making sure their hypothesis makes sense, and making sure also when we think of different treatments within an experiment, we are clearly understanding what is changing that's going to impact that learning, right? So, and that's part of that analytics community that we just, design review that we just launched, is also training some of the new analysts to understand, to ask some of those questions, like what really is so different between your treatments that you think is going to move the needle.
Making sure that those changes are, Dylan, you had a word for it before, big bets?
Potentially aligned to big bets. I think the thing that Lee's and I said implicitly but didn't explicitly say is that we went from an area where there was only one team running experiments to now everybody's running their own experiments. Yes. And so it's distributed across the organization, where that engineering team and Scrum team is actually empowered to run their own experiments. So there isn't an experimentation team and then the team that actually builds the website or builds the application. Yep. It is the team that's building that part of the application. It's also building the experiments in that area, which I know isn't common for everybody, but it makes it so that that team can understand what's happening with their particular part of the experience. If an alert goes off, they're the ones that are responding to it. They know about the experiments that are in that area, and they're empowered to fix it and empowered to make the decision based upon the results that they see. And so that's a very different way than I know Dell was doing. It's very different from that. There was a program management team. And so it's a distributed system from that perspective in CG. So.
Yeah.
And which speaks to the reason that the training that Bree developed became so necessary, because you had people without the experimentation expertise that were running experiments and maybe not fully understanding the results and the need for the hypotheses and things like that.
Yeah, the people who needed me weren't the people who had Lee. It was taking the amazing work that Lee's done and Dylan has done,
right,
and bringing it to the people and spreading it around.
So, and I know this is a very rough estimate unless Dylan has this in his back pocket and hasn't shared it. Do you guys have an idea of how many different teams across all of Intuit are testing today?
I know, yes.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So
it's a whole lot of teams, right?
But it's not enough. And so I'm not even constructively dissatisfied. I'm just dissatisfied. It's not enough. And so we have an opportunity, and that's why this training is so important. And that's why making it so that Bree is out there and we actually figure out a way to make it so that everybody takes this training is really, really important, so that people can start to understand that our D4D methodology can be used for experimentation too, and it should be. And those are the same things, so there's no real difference there. But how to do it safely and how to do it in a way that makes it so that they can actually get results that are meaningful for them. So whether the test wins or loses, as long as they're answering the leap of faith, that's the biggest thing. That's what we want to understand.
Which brings me to one of the questions that was given to me over the Zoom chat, which was, if there's a no-win result from a test, like no particular variation, it's a wash, it's inconclusive. Do you guys dig deeper to look at the possible reason for the inconclusive results, why they didn't move the needle, or do you scrap and move on?
It depends on what we learn. Funny enough, actually, one of the questions I do pose to the team when they put together a learning plan is, what do you do if the test is flat? Right? It's like you think ahead of time based on what your success metrics are and what you're trying to learn. If it is inconclusive, if it's flat, what do you do? Are we going to iterate? Are we going to say, okay, this idea just clearly wasn't good enough, we're going to start from scratch? Because we ask what we are for. It's almost like a forcing mechanism for them to think through ahead of time as we look at the test results, what they would want to do. Because we do ask a couple of questions of like, what are your decision criteria? And then, and I get this asked all the time. They're like, what is the difference? Because I have another question that says, what are the additional decision criteria you have? And a lot of product managers will ask me, what are the differences? I'm like, you have your core metrics. Then if your test is flat, are there anything else you would consider? Right, to call it a win or exactly, or what you would want to do after. And we get both. There are times where we'll say the team will have already in their mind think, okay, I want to iterate off of this if the results don't tell us what we want to learn, or we don't have a win, or if we have a clear, like, I don't want to call it a loser, but we clearly don't have a winner, but we see we're like, oh, maybe there's something we need to dig into, and the team will spend time digging into that.
And to Corey's point on the chat, we may be testing a platform change, and if it makes it so that the engineers can move 10 times faster and it's flat or there's no detectable difference, that's great, and we move on.
That's a huge win.
It's a huge win because it makes everybody more productive. And so we're applying this methodology of D4D not only to just, are we improving the customer space, but are we improving the employee space? And in fact, that's how we revamped how we do interviewing. And so it's core to how we do many different things, which is pretty amazing. So
we often talk about our KPIs where we're talking about how we don't want just that data insight, that the quantitative data, but using things like user testing, and it's why we do Follow Me Homes, to understand really what's happening.
The color, the why, the WH.
The why. Yeah.
How do you guys think what has been the effect of the standardization that you've tried to roll out through this training? Like, since it started, since the first training, the teams that have taken it, what has changed for you guys, Dylan, Lee, when you see this stuff, or Bree, if you're getting feedback, like, how has the way the trainees do their everyday optimization, experimentation work changed?
Yeah, so I've seen my very, very little or very small goal this year is to make it so people are writing clear hypotheses that have the thinking built into them. And I've seen the teams that we've worked with actually come up with better hypotheses. And as they come up with them, I coach them and I say, okay, so before we talk about results, let's read off the hypotheses so that we can make sure we're all playing along the same scorecard so we can understand it. And so that's gotten much better. You know, people think about, and Lucas Vermeer talked about this at CXL 2019 about button color, red versus green. That's not a helpful hypothesis, but a hypothesis of if we increase the contrast of the buttons, then we'll see an increased number of clicks because the contrast is greater, and that increase will be more than 5%.
And that is scalable.
And that's scalable, right? And so going from red to green isn't scalable. You can't find, I mean, you can find all the red buttons and change them to green if you want to, but if you can now find all the or low contrast buttons and make them high contrast. And so looking for those things that are like that in order to be able to make it so that people with vision challenges may be able to find it better. Like that's customer empathy in action. And that's a hypothesis that can be scaled across all of those. And so getting people to write better hypotheses is step one for us. At least for me, at least that's really, really important. So
yeah,
yes.
And I think that we've also seen a little bit of an improvement on, because one of the things we also talk about is having your test plans, your test results be those living documentation that 18 months down the road, people can look at it and understand what was going on, what the
figure out what was tested.
And so it's really encouraging to see that stuff happen, where we're seeing like people do grabbing the screen grabs of the landing page and making sure that we're calling out, because otherwise they don't do it and then we lose it and never know what the actual test looked like. And yeah, so that's been wonderful to see as well.
But I'm sure everybody here already has a testing archive of all the tests that they've ran in the past, right? So
right.
I'm sure it's centralized and thorough and just really robust.
When I first started working with the team, they were sending out test announcements. I'm like, well, what does the control look like? And so they weren't sending out the control, so you never knew what the testing was against. And so that was lost in the archive. So you went back 2 years before and tried to figure out what was tested and what was tested against, and you really couldn't get it. And they're like, well, nobody's ever asked for control before. And it's like, well, yeah, because you need to think about what you're going to be doing in 6 months from now. So
yeah, and we're also finding that people are sending less of like the data dumps as results, because
tables of numbers and just I think it's both having the frameworks to communicate about the end results of a test, but also the confidence to know how to talk about a test, to know that, you know, this is what we were set up to learn and here's what we're now going to do because of that. That's been really impactful as well. Awesome. So you guys described the way you get your deep customer empathy is fairly unique. You have customers you can actually go sit with, or follow them home or bring them in. Most of the folks in the TLC aren't in that scenario. Some of them aren't even allowed to contact their customers. But I know, because we've discussed during our mini sessions, that there are other ways to get to that customer empathy. Could you guys
walk outside?
Yeah, well, sure. Because you guys talk through a little bit how you get in the mind of the customer.
We had one of the founders of IDEO come and speak yesterday at Intuit, and he's in our design leader has actually worked with him quite a bit, and he said that it was always amazing where all the IDEO offices were. They were always near a bar. And they were always near, what was the other thing that he said?
It was always in a city. So where there were people around, it was near college, campus, and then near a bar, because whenever they needed to,
they could just walk outside and get feedback. Even if they weren't the target customer, they would get immediate feedback on whether or not it was going one way or the other. Now, ideally, they would find the target customer and then ask them in the swath of people that are outside. But that's, they just walk outside and get feedback that way. So.
And in the posturing part, and like the thing that like the frame of mind that you need to be aware of, it's the idea that you're not testing the whole thing. You just want to test the one tiny piece, and the one tiny piece is less scary, and it doesn't take as long. And it's not as big of a process to develop it to then go and get in front of people.
And just,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Lee.
I was gonna say, and I can use it like when I was in entertainment, all of us were like research. Everyone in the company were like research candidates, because if we were trying to launch a new show, we would literally pass it around to people, or like set up sessions, a conference room, as we call it, screening, and get feedback from the company to understand, like, did they like it, right? Just so for us, like, talking to anybody, even within the company, is our customer base.
Yeah, I've set out a table in the cafeteria and just sat there and asked people as they walked by questions. So like, you have to like be willing to be out there a little bit, and not everybody I know is like me, that likes that kind of thing.
Well, and for those that aren't as extroverted, there's also, you can listen into the call center. You can listen into sales calls. You can,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? There's more than one way to get in the head of the customer. You can also be the customer. A lot of us are customers for the brands that we work for. And as you go through the process and you experience frustration, feed that into your recommendations as well. Just make sure it's not a story of one person.
Exactly.
I want you guys to take a second to talk about, because this resources slide, I'm going to send this out to everybody afterwards. But if you guys want to walk through, I actually have the tabs open. Can you guys explain what you're going to be sharing with the TLCers today? This is the first one, the Intuit.
Yeah. So that's our innovation, the Intuit Lab. So this is our externally available site that I was able to grab a lot of content. And the thing that I would highlight is the video section. If you go on the video tab, there's a lot of examples and like case studies and interviews, and it's just really powerful because I can only do so great of a job of explaining the power of this framework. And so this helps. So that's that piece. And then the second one is the article that I referenced about the Innovation Catalyst team. So this group of us that spend our time, being evangelists of this method and facilitating teams through. And it's how we keep our innovation alive.
And the last one is more recently from 2015, and it was our CEO's take on building a design-driven company. And so it's about how we use D4D across all the things that we do. So that was added there.
So all of this is awesome stuff. All of it's publicly available, going to be shared with you guys. You guys can share broadly. Could they reach out to any of you if they have follow-up questions on
Certainly.
the TLC?
Yep,
Certainly.
definitely.
Awesome. How long have you been an Innovation Catalyst, Bree?
I've been an Innovation Catalyst for 2.5 years, and I'm now the site lead for our San Diego site, which is super fun because I get to make more Innovation Catalysts.
That's awesome. So now you're training other Innovation Catalysts.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dylan, of the teams that you've seen go through the D4D training, from somebody like Bree doing an innovation session, how does that change the test ideas that come out, the quality of the tests? Does it change more the rapid experiments that we were talking about, that you can get an answer really quick, or does it also affect the controlled experiments?
So it brings about a change in how teams want to experiment better. So it's not just rapid experiments or controlled experiments. It's like, oh, now I see a hole that we have because we don't have enough customer empathy. We're just trying to solve for conversion wins. And so how do I go about actually going after those things? And so it changes how we work. So it's not just about the rapid experiments or the controlled experiments, but it changes how we work, and how, because we're teaching stats and we're teaching hypothesis creation, and we're teaching how to come up with better test ideas and how to actually talk about them in a way at the end result. It actually brings about better working relationships between the analysts and the product managers and the marketers as well, which I think is hugely invaluable. And that's not something that I think Bree set out to do, but or maybe she did. And so it really, really helps. And so it makes it so that teams are more comfortable talking about experimentation, and it's more in how they operate, which is, I know, something that Bree was trying to target after for that. So.
Yeah, my secret is that I just knew that I needed people who were smarter than me to connect dots for people. There we go.
There you go. You got Dylan and Lee, some of the best. Any final tips or anything you guys want to share about D4D, CDI, rapid experimentation?
Just do it, but get started.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, TLCers, for your patience. Sorry that we had to reschedule. Really looking forward to hearing your comments. You guys ask questions of this team or of me. I will post the recording as soon as it's finalized and share out, and you guys can share broadly. And of course, I'm going to send this deck out. I will, I think what I'll do is send it through the email channel. So if some of you, because our list is getting broader, some of you, if it gets blocked because of the size of the list, you can either add kelly.wortham@searchdiscovery.com to your accepted list, to your whitelist email, or just ping me over on Slack and let me know you didn't get it, and then I'll send it to you direct.
Hey, Kelly, what's the next talk going to be?
I have 2 in the works, and I don't know which one's going to happen when, but we're hoping that Lucas is going to be one of them, and the other one's a secret.
Okay. Sounds awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.